All right, folks, welcome to the Strong for Life podcast. I'm joined with Josh Hillis again. Josh was episode number 2 on the podcast. We were just talking just before we went live that I was in quarantine in Bangkok in like November 2021, the last time me and Josh talked. But I've been a huge fan of his work for years. I think Fat Loss Happens on Monday was the first time I came across Josh through Dan John. And I just love his approach. It makes so much sense, and we're gonna really just unpackage a lot of his ideas on today's call. So, Josh, thanks for taking time, man. Really appreciate you coming on again.
Thanks for having me again. This is cool. This is cool.
Awesome, mate. Do you want to give people a quick background about, who you are and why they should listen to you today?
Yeah. I'm someone who helps busy professionals to eat in a way that fits their values, especially if they struggle with stress eating and emotional eating. I started as a personal trainer like 20 years ago. And I wrote my first book on like eating habits and I was trying to find like I'd worked for a company that had put people on meal plans, like they had registered dietitians make meal plans for people and gave people meal plans, and that just didn't work for a lot of people. And I was trying to find a way to have it work for like more people. And so that's how I got into habit-based eating. That was my first book. But then I still got clients that were like, "Hey Josh, this is all cool, but I can't stop eating at night, right? I can't stop." Essentially, they didn't say stress eating, but it was basically like stress eating and emotional eating. And that sucked because I didn't have any tools for them. Like I didn't have anything that was like really very useful. And that's what sent me to school to study psychology and to seek out some professors who specialized in a specific perspective that in the research has been shown to work really well with stress eating and emotional eating and cravings. And that's kind of where my whole new approach comes from. And that's kind of ended up being my second book, and now the program I'm running now.
Amazing, mate. Yeah, let's dive in there. So we were talking about your bachelor's in psychology. So it's
Yeah.
8 years in total. You said it's going to be. You're doing it part time. Um,
Yeah.
what are you thinking now versus before with your approach from everything you've learned in psychology, but maybe in other areas as well? How have you changed your approach?
That's a great question. So with studying psychology specifically, so what actually sent me back to school was a friend of mine sent me a study that was out of Drexel University. They were comparing acceptance-based behavioral interventions, which was very new at the time, which was like I shouldn't say it's new. It was 30 years old. Applying it to behavioral weight loss was pretty new, right? Um, they were applying this new approach to like the standard approach, and the new approach was like accepting cravings and accepting emotions and accepting it was acceptance based, right? And the old approach was like, I need to change my thoughts to not have cravings anymore, to like not want these things, and change my emotions. And so it was kind of like this like changing thoughts, cravings, and emotions versus like accepting thoughts, cravings, and emotions. And the acceptance-based approach worked way better. It worked better. It was more effective for everyone in that study, but it was especially more effective for people who emotionally ate, or for people that scored high on scales of like food reactivity, like they see food and they want it. And so I was like, that's cool. But I literally could not wrap my head around it. It was so counterintuitive. It was so like the opposite of everything I'd seen before that I actually bought the manuals from the researchers made like a manual on how they ran there. And I got the manuals and I like could not get it. Um it like the accept like conceptually acceptance made sense, but but the actual like exercises and the way they were teaching it, I couldn't get. So like working with a professor or having a couple classes with a professor who specialized in that was great. and really getting like the broader research on accepting emotions and well-being. And just it's weird that another one of my professors is like world famous like thought leader on addiction, and his whole thing was based around that like in many ways was based around like the same like idea. Like I kept seeing like it just bigger and bigger and bigger, like, oh, humans have a lot of different emotions, and the more we can be real about the fact that we have all the like we have all these ups and downs. No one's happy all the time. Um, that like it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be anxious. It's okay to be all these things that like social media tells us it's like we should be able to fix. And that we just like don't need to fix these things. And it goes even further. There's some cool research on like emotional diversity, and like the more like emotional diversity people have is like a higher like is more the research suggests that having a higher emotional diversity relates more to well-being than having like more average positive like emotionality. That actually like the wider range of emotions we have access to is. And anyway, I think it's really cool that that's one of those things that shifted so big for me. It changed it pervades absolutely everything I do. um and I actually don't talk about that very often, which is really funny.
Yeah, because you can see like how excited you're getting because it's so effective, I guess. But even as you were talking there, I'd like you to maybe walk through this for me in particular, but I think a lot of people listening as well. What I find personally is uh, when an emotion comes up, I want to escape from it. I don't want to feel it, even
Right.
though just sitting with it and feeling with it, then it passes really. It's really efficient.
Yeah.
Like it works so well, which is what you're saying, like addiction, food, all these things. Um, and then when I sit with it, I'm like, oh, now I can move on versus like having this like a stress eating response or something like that, and then there's
Yeah.
shame and guilt associated with that.
Yeah.
Um, why do you think that is? Like, why is it? Because I need to keep reminding myself, oh, just sit with it, and then it'll be fine. But then there's this like internal fear of that happening. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, it like number one, it sucks. It's not comfortable. Like, um, we're really good. Like, and when I say we, I mean humans. We're like really good at like avoiding pain and moving towards pleasure, right? So like, something uncomfortable comes up, like it makes sense to eat some food to avoid that feeling for a little while, right? Like food works really well. Food's easy. Food's quick. There's so many things we could do that that just take more effort. They just take like so much more effort. But so sitting with it takes some intentionality. It takes some effort. It also takes what so there's a concept called urge surfing, and there's like a parallel concept called emotion surfing, which is this idea that like an urge to eat or and similarly an emotion, both of those build, crest, and fade, right? Which is what you were just talking about. That like if you just sit with it, it actually like goes pretty fast. But in the moment, it feels like it's going to build forever, right? It doesn't feel like it's gonna, oh look, yeah, if I sit with this, it's gonna crest and fade, right? It feels like it's gonna build forever and it's gonna be like overwhelming, right? And so part of it is that it's uncomfortable, and part of it is that like we feel like it's gonna build forever. Um, and then we can also make it worse where if we get kind of like sucked up in it, like if we start like spinning it and like feeding it, we can amplify it. On the flip side, really kind of weird, if we fight it and suppress it, that can have like an ironic effect where it actually amplifies it.
Yeah.
So those are three things, right? Like it's uncomfortable, we feel like it's going to build forever, and we tend to do things to try and manage it that actually amplify it. So that's why. Um, one
That's a
other little
great
thing I want to,
description. Just
huh?
the urge surfing is such a great description. That is awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, that's great.
I didn't invent it. It's a that comes out of the broader
But you can just
world.
visualize it. It makes so much sense. Like people can really grasp that.
Yeah. There's a pitfall with that though. There's a pitfall. Um the pitfall with so urge surfing is one of my favorite things to teach people. Super useful. A great entry point into working with all the stuff. The pitfall is that if I'm like, hey, I'm gonna do this urge surfing thing because I want these emotions to go away. Um, it doesn't always work. So so it will urges, emotions, these are things that like build, crest, and fade. And if we quote surf them, it will build, crest, and fade faster. Mostly because we're not prolonging it, right? But it still builds crests and fades in its own time. And so if we're pausing before having like if we're like, oh, this feels um like like I feel so tight in my body and I'm feeling really frustrated about this thing at work and I have all these thoughts about this deadline and I really want to eat this donut that's in the break room. Um, if we have all of that and we pause and we're like surfing that, maybe that all fades in a reasonable amount of time, right? A lot of times it could be like, oh, like 5 minutes that actually fades, right? That'd be cool. That's cool, right? That happens a lot of times. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it does like maybe it hangs out for a half hour, right? Like it's not gonna hang out forever, but maybe it hangs out like longer than you would want for the decision period about whether or not to eat the donut, right?
Mhm.
So at some point we need to say like, regardless of where I am in this cravings wave or this emotion wave regardless of where I am, I want to be able to make some space for that to just be there so that I can make a choice based on the kind of person that I want to be about eating. And for most of the people who hire me, the kind of person they want to be about eating includes having the normal stresses of their day-to-day life show up without that always driving them towards food. So at some point, they aren't just like sitting with that, waiting for it to go away. They're sitting with that like it's not going to go away within the time frame of me making a choice about this donut, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so that's one of those things that we want to work on. We want to work on being able to make those decisions based on our values, even when the end isn't in sight.
Have you heard of internal family systems?
I have, I have.
Yeah.
I'm not super well versed on it, but actually, tell me
Yeah,
what you're.
I've done it like for probably 4 years. Like it's been so helpful for me. Um, but it basically breaks your psyche into kind of like four parts, we'll say. Um, so you've got firefighters, which are you get a stress response and they jump in, whether that might be food or drugs, alcohol, whatever the thing is that the damaging behavior at work as well, it can be.
Yeah,
So that's one bucket. Then the next one would be managers. And the managers are kind of the organizers. They organize your life and they're doing everything. Um,
yeah,
then the exiles are like the inner child or inner children, they say in IFS. Well, they don't just call it exiles because you could have multiple younger parts that have, traumas in whatever capacity.
sure.
They get triggered, and then the firefighter jumps in to save the day. And then finally, you have the self, which is kind of what you're saying around like being value based decision making, and that would be
Yeah.
self-led in IFS. So I think it's quite similar, the philosophies, and it's interesting because in IFS, the firefighter acts up, and then when you work with the IFS therapist, it allows you to work with that firefighter part instead of hating it. And it's like, oh,
Yeah.
I hate myself. I ruin everything. It's like, oh, that part used to be useful at one point, and now it's actually not helping me anymore. I'm 36 now. I'm not six, and
Right.
you can have more compassion for it, and then you can then the responses become less intense, rather than, as you were saying, like wishing it wasn't there and
Yeah.
holding it down or wanting to cut it out, and then it blows up even more. Um, so yeah, I think you would be probably very interested in that
That's
kind of,
awesome.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's
And
like there's so many similarities because like so from a contextual behavioral science perspective, there are all these processes that are so similar to that, right? There's self as context, which is essentially like being the noticer, like being the person that like essentially notices those parts, right?
mm,
And then there's acceptance, which is like accepting those parts. And then there's diffusion, which is like separating I guess you could say like the automatic responses of those parts from action, right?
mm,
And then there's like values clarity and committed action, which would fit into like you're saying like that self.
yeah,
And that's so similar. That's so great. That's so
yeah,
cool.
yeah, yeah. And I think
It's
it's
just
the
it's like it's like there are like there it's like the automatic responses are like pre-named and like pre-sort, and I could see that being so useful. I can imagine that being so useful.
yeah, I think it's just it gets you to just understand, like, I think a big thing is like it's not you as a whole and you're bad.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, part of me has reacted, and I understand that that part was trying
Yeah.
to help another part, actually, that vulnerable exile. So you can, I find it really good for self-compassion, instead of just being
Yeah.
like, because the self-loathing never goes anywhere good. It just
Yeah.
becomes a bigger thing again. um
Yeah. So
so
like that, like sometimes I talk with people about emotion. So working with emotions a lot, like sometimes we talk about the fact that like from a functional perspective on emotions, emotions are all adaptive, right? They're all designed for a use, right? Um, that use might be like a mismatch for a given situation, right? But like anger is, trying to protect you, and sadness is trying to like signal for, like they all have, adaptive functions. And so it's sometimes kind of useful to think like, oh, this is like my mind's actually trying to help me, you know. It doesn't always get it exactly right. But there's a there's a um there's a helpful intent.
talk to me about emotional diversity.
Oh wow. So emotional diversity, this is uh I had a professor who did some research on this. And this isn't really my it's been four years, three years since I took that class. So emo diversity is a combination of emotional variability and abundance. So the concept is actually based on ecodiversity, right? Like a stronger ecosystem has like a wider variety and wider abundance of plants and animals. And so emodiversity is just that same thing. And so what they found was that when people had not just like not just differentiation. Like so emotional differentiation is like where you're like, oh, I'm able to name frustrated versus angry, or like despondent versus sad, or like you're able to like really like finally name what you're feeling, which is a combination of both like vocabulary and practice, right?
Mhm.
Um, so but not just that like emotional discrimination, but also like an abundance of emotions, or like you're able to discriminate those and they show up in your life.
Mm.
Um, and so you've got like all these emotions going on, and it in a way it's a lot like I don't know if do you know Brene Brown at all?
Yep.
Um, she uh she did a survey of her website visitors, and the majority of her website visitors only had access to like mad, sad, and glad, you know? And so that's where her
How
whole book, like Atlas of the
how did
Heart,
they
came from.
how did they test that?
I don't know what she did on her website.
Okay.
That's a really good question. Oh man, I used to be so if you'd caught me 3 years ago, I was deep into how they tested for all this stuff, because all that stuff is really interesting. But since I don't use it at all, um, I don't know.
That's okay. The but the point is like the more you were saying like if you're kind of happy, maybe I'm happier than you more often, but you've got a greater diversity of emotions, you're actually in a better, like your mental health is probably in a better place, or your psychological
Yeah,
well-being is in a better place.
yeah, that's what that study on emodiversity suggested. Um, and that's pretty wild, right? That's pretty cool. And I mean, most of the research that I bounce off of is kind of talking about how suppressing emotions is bad for well-being,
Have they
right?
done that? That would be very interesting on different cultures, countries.
Oh yeah.
Um, some countries are really expressive. Like in Ireland, people are like, "Yeah, I'm grand," but you're you're not grand. Like grand can mean like 15 different emotions. You know,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
um, and it's like you probably won't, express yourself as much, or it's very funny. Like if you see like two Italians talking, it's like they're having a fight, but they're just talking, and like it's
Yeah, 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 yeah.
so it'd be very interesting to see the different cultural impacts of that as well.
That would be amazing. And that's one of those things where we're looking at any study, looking at the population sample, makes such a difference. And have to acknowledge that most of the research I look at is United States, right? Like 80% of it is like in the United States. In the United States, like middle class white women, like that's. And so you're like, does this translate to other cultures? Does this translate to other ethnicities? Does it transfer to other age groups? Because like we always get like this, the same ages, the same like socioeconomic, and that's a big limitation of uh a lot of the research I see.
Yeah, I actually, Ryan, who you know from GMB, we did a podcast on, because he lived in Japan for 20 years or 25 years, and
Yeah.
now he's been in the US, I think, for 4 years. And we literally did a full podcast on the differences, like the environmental differences, because Japan doesn't have
Oh,
any obesity, or it's very little, and the US has got a huge issue. It was so
yeah.
interesting talking to him, because he's like his hips are
Wow.
really sore now because he's driving everywhere. In Japan, he didn't drive; he was walking,
Right.
or public transport. Access to good quality food is just harder in the US. I think that that's so interesting, the environmental factors
Oh, it's
on
huge.
different cultures. Like, um, yeah, do you have anything you'd like to share in that area?
Oh, it's just interesting because like psychology is what I'm studying. It's very like individual centric, but I've taken some classes on health education and that have this like public health perspective that is so much more geared towards environment. It's really cool to like zoom out and go like, oh wow, if someone lives in a walking town, that's drastically different from if they live in a driving town, right? Or like how much infrastructure there is for exercise, right? Like are there in-town trails? Are there good parks? Are there parks with gym equipment? Are there I mean like all those things make such a difference. Like what kind of store food you have like what kind of
Yeah,
stores you have access to? Like is there fresh like, I mean it makes such a huge difference. And sometimes that gets lost in these discussions about like what can I individually do. At some point we have to acknowledge and manage the resources or lack of resources available, you know.
yeah. Yeah, I want to, we talked about it before we went live, but Ozempic, because Ozempic is
Oh yeah.
not really something, it's what maybe in the UK, but in a lot of Europe, it's not really that well known. But all of
Yeah.
my clients in the US, a lot of them are now taking it, and it's becoming like in one area, I think one podcast, they were like, oh, this has got the potential impact that the iPhone did on society, which is
Oh,
crazy.
maybe, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but would love to hear your like your input on it, or how you can explain it to people, and the approach, like the pros and cons maybe as well.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not a doctor. Definitely discuss this with your doctor. But wow, this is a huge topic in the United States, and man, do people have just like really, really, really strong opinions. My opinion is radically neutral. Um, the thing is, you know, um, if you look at the hormones that cause that signal fullness, right? And slow down gut motility, like GLP-1 is gonna make you feel more full, right? So if you're taking a drug that is basically just like increasing GLP-1, you're gonna feel more full. So you can basically inject fullness. That makes sense. That like totally makes sense, you know? Um, on the I mean like in the research where they were trying to figure out like do these hormones increase, like they'd inject people and people get more so it makes so much more sense. And so if people talk to their doctor and the doctor thinks that's a good idea, then try it out, like I know I think it's hilarious that there are trainers on Instagram that are losing their minds over Ozempic, and you're like, I know this dude's on steroids. This dude is, you're like, this is so silly.
And he
Um,
probably he probably has an eating disorder, but it's
right,
to
right,
it's to like be super psychotic with food control.
yeah. So it's like it's gonna make you feel more full. Some people do just have like okay. From my perspective, if I've had clients on Ozempic and I've had clients that consider Ozempic and I have, um, and so I've had clients go like, yeah, I'm gonna try it. I have clients that like consider it and like didn't do it, and like so I've had clients all over the like it's it's a big topic of conversation. Even the people that aren't considering doing it, their friends are, um, and so here's the thing that people want to sort out for themselves. A lot of people that are struggling with their eating feel hungry all the time. Um, some people actually do have more hunger. Most people I shouldn't even say most people. A lot of people, um, life is showing up in a way that's making them hungrier than they need to be. So things that I work with on clients, I'm basically taking like all the things that make them hungrier than they need to be and like flipping that. So like if someone's not getting enough sleep, they're going to be hungrier. If they're eating in front of screens, I mean, the research on eating with screens is so wild. If you the research suggests that if you are watching a screen, not only do you eat more while you're watching the screen, but you get hungrier faster, like for the next meal, right?
Wow.
And the hypothesis that they're working from is that humans are actually like really bad at interpreting our internal fullness signals, even when we feel them, and that our memory of the previous meal actually plays a big role in how we interpret those. And so that's why when we eat distracted, we tend to eat more later in the day. And they've replicated that with like eating in the dark or eating listening to the podcast or eating while playing video games. I don't know how you do that, eating while working. But like all these different ways of distracting people, they end up getting hungrier later on top of eating more at the meal. Um,
Did they
there's
controlled for the food type as well with that?
oh yeah,
Like, was
yeah,
it
yeah,
like
yeah,
it wasn't highly processed food, it was just like regular
yeah,
food,
yeah,
or
yeah,
yeah, cool.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Wow,
You
interesting.
you have to control for what food is. Like
Yeah,
that's like they bring people in and feed them. They actually like give them all the same food, right?
yeah.
Um, but no, you brought processed food, right? Like there are plate balances that are going to have people feel more hungry, right? If people don't have a very balanced plate, they're going to be hungrier later. If people have smaller meals and snack more often, they're going to eat way more total energy and feel way less satisfied, right? Um, there are, and like hyper processed food tends to have people feel less satisfied, and for more energy. Like there are all these eating fast makes it harder to notice when you're full. How many different stress? So like stress and sleep loss both increase how fast food moves through your stomach. So you actually legitimately get hungrier faster on top of being like emotionally reactive. Like so they're all these things that make us hungrier than we need to be, right? Like for a lot of clients, if I get them eating um if they end up eating bigger meals, more balanced meals, and at regular-ish meal times, wow, does everything get easier? Like they're so much less hungry. And they had no idea that it was that like diet world had taught them to eat meals that were too small, or that like small meals and snacks was just adding up to like 3 times as much food as they would have had if they just had like legit meals. Or if they like ate without scrolling on their phone, or if they turn off screens and got to sleep like an hour or two earlier. Like all those things I think you probably want to sort out first. And then,
Mm,
but then the flip side is like, or you could use Ozempic and like not need to sort that out. But I think the way to go is probably if someone's gonna do it, probably do both, you know?
yeah.
Um, and so, and anyway, I like
Do you
um
think certain people though would be so down, like so tired, so stressed, so sleep deprived, and so maybe addicted to processed foods that they're in such a deep hole that maybe, okay, like let's get you
oh
20, thirty
yeah,
percent of your body weight down,
yeah,
and then we can look at the
yeah,
habits and stuff. I think like that's where I can really see, because
absolutely.
it's a big, because like it's so funny when you're just saying it, like basically do what your grandmother told you to do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And you'll be fine. Like you'll be in optimal health. You'll be ahead of 90% of the population. Go for a walk, eat 3 meals, and go to bed on time.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but yeah,
So your point's great, right? Like, if some people are in any kind of circumstances where where that's going to be a thing that makes their life better, like do what's going to make your life better, and also, I'm certain there are people who just have more baseline hunger. Like, I'm sure that's a thing. So, I don't know how big that group is, right? But I'm I'm sure there are people that like it just makes sense for them, right? It
yeah,
just makes sense. And then, like you said, there are the people whose like circumstances, it's like, let's get things work, So uh I'm yeah, I think people should talk it over with their doctor and see if it's a thing for them. And I can, like I said, I've had clients that did it, I've had clients that didn't do it. Like, most of my clients have friends that are using Ozempic, and they have all different experiences with their friends' experiences, you know. Uh some people, like, them telling me about their friends, some of them, it like changed their life. Like, everything, like everything, they can't believe how much easier it is. They're like, oh, I can actually eat when hungry and stop when full now. And it's just like, and you're like, that's wonderful, right?
yeah,
And then another client told me about a friend who is on Ozempic, but still, like, emotional eating still an issue, right? Like, it didn't sort out using food as a way to manage emotion, like. So there's such a wide range of experiences people can have. um it is a really interesting time. I wonder if it will be as big as the iPhone, like you said, because at least
apparently,
in the
like,
United States, more than half of every adult every single year is attempting to lose weight in the United States.
yeah, because they were saying that like a lot of the large food manufacturers are forecasting like big drops in profits and need for production, and also airlines are forecasting needing less fuel. Like that's how big they're thinking this is going to be from a shift standpoint, which is like crazy.
Well,
Um,
it's wild to have something that works, right?
yeah,
Like that goes to show, like, how few things have ever worked.
yeah,
It's like bariatric surgery and this.
yeah. I definitely, talking to, because just you can just see it in general, like like you are at a disadvantage in the US with just the environment you're in. Like it's just harder to be slimmer. Like that's
Yeah.
see, I think that's seem like so I think it's such a you're starting at -5 already because it's like
Yeah.
here are
Yeah.
all the reasons that you can't get fit. We're gonna just, you know, just give you lots of processed food, no movement, everything. Then people are seeing that as well as like the norm. Like that's everyone around them
Yeah.
is overweight. So yeah, I think it just comes back to as well, the sleep, stress, and screens that that's what I see that constantly with clients. When we start addressing them, they're like, I can't believe how much better I feel, like in everything, you know, like stress management, food decisions are easier, resilience to just life in general, injuries go down. Like it's so
Yeah.
regardless, it's just like they're the big rocks for people.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Like you've been coaching for a long time in the food industry or in the nutrition. I'm not gonna say you're in the well, I guess you are in the diet side of things, but you're definitely the opposite to most diet-based coaches, will say. But like, would you say a lot of people, it's probably like an emotional, like a therapist more so than like following a diet? Or what would be your thoughts there to deal with this kind of food, this pacifier
So,
that they're using food for?
so there are, so I'm a coach, right? I teach skills, right? I teach emotion skills. um, based on contextual behavioral science, like models for coaching, right? And a lot of my clients are in therapy for other things. And wow, is that helpful? That tends to be very helpful. Like therapy is super useful in my life. It's useful for a lot of my clients. Um, but um, but at the same time, they weren't learning the skills that they needed to manage like eating choices in that environment. I wanna be clear that there are some people that should be working with a therapist and not a coach, right? Like I don't work with any kind of eating disorder at all, right?
Hmm.
Um, so so there's definitely the thing where it's like therapy is the way to go. But from a for like basic stress eating and emotional eating, um, it's just coaching skills. It's like I need the skills to be able to eat when hungry and stop when full, and be able to be with emotions and cravings without having to eat to manage them, and be clear about my personal values about eating, and clear about how those values show up in specific choices that I make in my life. And so that th those are all just skill things. That's just like skill learning, right? Um, and um, and so that's a coaching thing, right? Like people can learn to notice their thoughts and emotions and urges and cravings and make some space for them to be there. People can learn to get clear about their values and check in with their values in the moment. They can learn structures like putting in a pause 10 minutes before snacking to do all of these things, right? Like set a timer and in that time actually like check in with myself and my body and what's going on, and like um check in like do I know what kind of choice is like towards my values and away from my values in this kind of situation, you know? Um, so that's all just that's all skills.
Yeah. Um, Can you like it depends on the person, I guess, but can you give some maybe actionable stuff for people? Like they're like, okay, I really
Yeah.
like this approach, this makes sense, but like maybe what would be like a skill or a habit that I can
Yeah, yeah,
start
yeah, yeah,
practicing?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So someone's working on snacking. First thing you want to do is put in some structure, right? Some guidelines, like pause 10 minutes for snacking. And so, pausing 10 minutes for snacking, if that's all that someone did, if that's all that someone did, it's amazing how well that works. Just putting a gap in between wanting and choosing whether or not to have, right? And what's cool about that is like that's simple, it's concrete, you know if you're doing it. That can work for someone, like they can like turn like stop listening to this and they can use it immediately, right? And then things that they want to work on longer term are like distinguishing hunger from emotions, or hunger from stress, or hunger from cravings. And so they can start working on, like, in that 10 minutes, checking in. Like, do I feel an empty, hollow feeling in my stomach? Or do I feel something else? Like, what do I feel in my body? Oh, I feel really tight in my shoulders. Well, that's not an empty, hollow feeling in my stomach, right? Like that's probably stress, you know? Do I feel hungry for this one specific treat? Or do I feel hungry for balanced meal? Oh, I want a balanced meal. Oh, that's legit hunger. I just want this specific treat. That's probably a craving. That's probably stress. You know, or like if I pause 10 minutes, does it build or does it fade? You're like, oh, after 10 minutes, I forgot. Well, that probably wasn't hunger. But after 10 minutes, oh, actually now my stomach's growling. Okay, that's hunger, right? So actually checking in, and that can take a little bit more practice, right? People, that's something you want to get a lot of reps into. But and
And
then
Josh, just on that,
oh
mate,
yeah,
with like let's just say I check in the emotion. I'm like, oh, that's I don't want a full meal. I want something like a snack or something. So I
Yeah.
identify that. Then what would you recommend to do next? Like just smash the snack or what? Is it eat
So
it like gorge the snack or what would you recommend?
smash the snack, dude. No, I mean it it depends. It's like most of my clients are hiring me because they want to snack less, right? Because like snacking has kind of gotten out of control and they're snacking at times that aren't hunger related. And so if you're like, oh, you know what, this is just stress or something, then dig in on that. Like what's going on there? Like, is there an emotion I can name? You know? Like, oh, actually, I'm kind of worried or I'm kind of lonely, right? Well, that's not hunger, you know? Could I make some space? Could I make some space for that loneliness? Just be there for a few minutes, and kind of zoom out and look at my whole day and like, does it make sense going with the thing, with the things that are going on? Can I check in with my body? Like, what else is going on? Like, where do I feel that loneliness in my body? Can I just let that be there for a few minutes? And then in that few minutes, in that few minutes where you've just made some space for that to be there, that's where you can check in with, what choice fits the kind of person I want to be, you know? Like a lot of the times we're working on things that come up over and over and over again, right? So if you're like, oh, I'm always a little frustrated in the afternoon. Well, this is like the 17th time this month you've been frustrated in the afternoon. Like you could actually get really clear about who do I want to be in the face of frustration? Like, do I want to eat every time I'm frustrated? Or like, oh, I get kind of lonely at night, like, do I want to eat every time I feel lonely? And so most of my clients are like, no, I'd rather like have some self-compassion or call a friend or like if I'm worried in the afternoon, I'd rather like go for a walk. Like, and these things like not as a way to fix it, but as a way to just like take care of myself because I'm a human and I need to be taken care of. So you're checking in, you're figuring out what's actually going on. Like what's actually going on. What's the, whether it's emotion, whether it's a habit, whether it's a craving, like what's actually going on. Can I make some space for that to be here for, a few minutes, 10 minutes, whatever. And then can I make a choice that fits the kind of person I want to be in? And like, if this kind of situation is coming up over and over and over and over again, then you want to be clear, like, who do I want to be when this shows up, right? If I'm worried every afternoon at 3 o'clock, or I'm frustrated every 3 o'clock, what are the conditions where I would be where I would be frustrated and I would want to eat? Or like, what are the conditions where I would want to eat at 3 o'clock? And what are the conditions where I wouldn't want to eat at 3 o'clock? And when you're clear about that, then when that situation shows up, you can look at like, is this like, I'm going to sit with this for 10 minutes. And in that 10 minutes, I'm going to figure out, does this meet the criteria or does it not?
I love that. That's so good, mate, because I guess it's so refreshing because so much of the information in the fitness industry is proteins, fats, carbs, meal timing, macros. There's no like in the moment, like
Yeah.
it doesn't matter about 20 grams of protein. I'm stressed out in my head and I'm hungry,
Yeah.
and this is like so actionable. And it's interesting what you're saying there because like it really it scales back to the sleep, the stress,
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
screens. Because if I'm on screens and I haven't slept well, there's no space now to even be aware of this happening, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's great, man. Yeah. It's just such a like, yeah, there needs to be more people like you in in the industry
Oh,
talking.
thanks, dude.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
I like we use this because I went through eating skills with you. I think it was 2020 or 2021 with GMB, but
Yeah.
we use the scaling habits, like that has transformed the way I coach so much. Like it's been so helpful because people are like, oh, I don't have to do it perfectly or not do it at all. Like I can do,
Right.
I can do it 5 out of 10 times and I'm still like not failing. Like that's
Yeah.
such a transformational way to teach people, because I think it's always in the past. It's like, oh, I fell off the diet again. I failed
Yeah.
again because I couldn't do it perfectly. Um,
Yeah.
I'm just conscious of your time, mate, but do you want to just explain the scaling habits for people listening?
Yeah. So like there's a so this is so program's called Eating Skills, right? It's a skill-based approach. It's like any other skill, right? It's like any other skill. If you're learning to play guitar, playing guitar is a skill, right? People instinctively know that they don't have to practice guitar 3 times a day to get better at guitar, right? You could practice guitar 3 times a week. You could practice it twice a week. You could miss a practice and still get better, right? And then when you're practicing playing guitar, are you going to miss some notes sometimes? Yeah, that's like part of learning. That's like part of learning. And you know what? Like when you stop missing notes, you'll just start learning like more complicated songs, right? And like more advanced songs, right? You'll like scale it up. And so if we can take a look at it like any like we tend to have so much more of an effective perspective on any other skill we learned, like any other skill we want to learn. If people listening have done any other kind of skill learning, if they can relate it to that, they'll do better than relating to it like the diet world has taught them, right? The diet
Mhm.
world taught them to be perfectionists. They were taught that if they didn't do it perfectly, they had to quit, right? The
Mhm.
diet world taught them to quit over and over and over again, right? Because that's what diet perfectionism is. It's just quitting more often, right?
Mhm.
Um, where from a skill-based perspective, we know that like practicing more often, you get better faster. And like if you practice and make mistakes and learn and practice again, that's how you get better, right? You can't practice hard things without making any mistakes. Like that's not, you know?
Yeah.
If you'll just relate to it like a skill, then it'll be fine. And so anyway, back to your whole thing. Like you can practice your eating skills once a day. You can practice them 3 times a week. You could practice, like, obviously more practice, you get better faster, but like there's no like on or off the wagon. There's no
Mhm.
like, if you tried to sit with your if you tried to sit with this craving and you ate anyway, you didn't do something wrong. You actually like practice, like you're like, oh, I sat with this craving for 3 minutes and then I ate. Well, that's cool, right? Like you weren't sitting with it for any, like that's some practice, right?
Yeah.
Maybe next time try 4 minutes. It's like strength training, like,
Yeah.
so that's, yeah. Does that,
Yeah. It makes so much sense when you say it, but like it just people are like, oh wow, yeah, or like learning Spanish, or I'm learning salsa dancing at the moment, which is
yeah,
it's been so good, but because like a lot of it's all about just repetitions.
yeah.
And that whole like is really funny as well. I talked to like all of the guys who dance, and I'm like, what advice do you have to get better at dancing? They're like, just don't stop dancing. That's basically that's the key. And it's the
Yeah,
same as fitness. Like keep
yeah,
keep showing up. Same with your habit or your food skills. If you practice putting your fork down or slowing down or taking a breath or pausing 5 or 10 minutes, most of the time, or you keep, you know, you don't just fall off for 9 months.
yeah,
You're going to get better,
yeah.
like
Like,
anything.
so, salsa dancing. Have you ever missed a step?
Yeah, but I quit because like I stopped. I'm gonna start again in
Of
January.
course you did, right? Like, who would keep going after that?
I know I missed step once, so it's like or like that Spanish class, I mispronounced the word, so I just left.
What? I can't
I
give up,
know
dude.
the
Not
teacher
for
pushed,
you.
the teacher got rid of me. Um, but I think it's a great way to it just shows how really ridiculous it is, because it's, you know, we've learned this from our parents, from the household we're in, from whatever the environment we're in. Maybe we picked up bad habits with the iPhone or watching shows, and we just need to rebuild better habits that are in line with our
Yeah.
values and goals, right?
Yeah.
Mate,
Yeah.
where can people learn more about your approach, coaching, programs, books, everything?
Yeah. So the best place to catch me is Instagram. So Instagram at Joshua Hillis. It's my full name, so I'm going to take in Josh Hillis. My website's joshhillis.com. My books are on Amazon. That's me. Oh, and the Eating Skills program is at eatingskills.com.
Amazing,
But
man.
anyway, if people are looking for me, Instagram's the place to go. That's where all the cool kids go.
Awesome, mate. Really appreciate your time today, okay?
Thanks, dude. This is fun. This is fun. This is so much
That
fun. I'm so
that
glad we
was
did this.
great.